I am happy to be joined by a man who needs no introduction, former major leaguer, World Series champion, current TV color analyst for the Houston Astros, Geoff Blum. Blummer, how are you doing today?
I'm actually doing pretty good. It's we have the day off because the Astros are on YouTube, but I'm doing really good. How you doing?
I am doing well. As I was telling you before we hopped on here, my wife and I just had our third kid, first daughter, a couple weeks ago. So life in our house has been very hectic. Just adjusting. My oldest just started 4K, so I've been taking him to school, and yeah, it's just been a little bit of an adjustment for us in our house. But no, things are going well. Baseball is exciting. It's heading down that final stretch, which is crazy because I feel like it just started not too long ago, but the season has flown by. And yeah, we're already looking into the postseason heading here in a couple of weeks now. But before we start, could you talk to me about how you got into baseball? I know you played for many years, but prior to that, what got you into baseball? Was it a family member or a specific team or a player?
I started playing when I was about 5 years old, and it was one of those things where my dad played, at junior college at Pasadena Community College and played baseball. I think he had a couple of opportunities in semi-pro as he thought he was going to work towards playing, Major League Baseball, but things didn't work out for him, whether it be injury, family, having to get to work or that kind of thing. But it was in his blood. And, me being the firstborn, and you try everything out on your firstborn, he threw me into baseball. And I actually gravitated towards it just because it was such a fun sport to me. And I actually lucked out in the sense that when I started T-ball, we actually had a very good team. There was camaraderie on the team immediately with guys that, guys, they're guys now, but when they were kids at the
Right.
time, we all got along great. And, my dad was a coach, and it just so happened that my dad knew Mike Sweeney, who was the father of Mike Sweeney Jr., who ends up playing for the Kansas City Royals for about 13 years, plays with the Philadelphia Phillies. So we created a bond. Two major league families got together when they were 5 years old. So I think it really started in that sense that the people around me were so good, and I loved the sport that much that I got around them. And of course, I played different sports throughout my childhood, but just baseball ended up being the one for me because my heart was truly in it. And fortunately, I had enough talent in it to make it happen.
That's awesome. And did you have a favorite team growing up? I know you were born in the Bay, as was I, but you moved down to Southern California. Were you an Angels fan or a Dodgers fan or even Padres fan growing up?
Yeah, I kind of floated around a little bit. I would go to Dodger games as a kid. Probably went to more Dodger games than I did anything because I was about 30 minutes east of Los Angeles inland, and it was just more convenient getting to ball games. So, I grew up with the Bill Russells, Davey Lopes, Reggie Smith, guys like that, watching them. So, and of course they were good in the mid, 80s. And so it was easy to watch them and latch onto them. What's kind of interesting about that whole situation is that they were in the National League West with the Houston Astros, who I work for now. So I watched plenty of Mike Scott, Nolan Ryan, Bill Dorn, a lot of these guys, Dickie Thon, Alan Ashby, who I eventually got to work with, oddly enough. But, so I knew a lot of the names and cast and characters in that National League West, but I definitely gravitated more to the Dodgers, Angels, and Padres, like you said. Tony Gwynn fan growing up, watching him, and then eventually playing for the Padres. I mean, there's so many connections in Southern California for me, but I was truly blessed at that time in the 80s to be watching teams like that.
For sure. And I grew up watching the early 2000s A's with the big three pitching staff and the Moneyball era. That really got me into baseball. My dad is Puerto Rican, huge baseball fan. We really were a baseball family growing up. I never played really past like T-ball. I wish I did, but my parents had other plans. They put me in swimming and in soccer, and baseball kind of never really became a sport that I played, but I enjoyed watching it. We had season tickets watching the A's. Grew up hating the Giants, just with that Bay Area rivalry. So yeah, I mean that's awesome it's awesome that California has five teams, and the Mariners aren't too far away as well. So just that whole West Coast, there's 6 different teams you can really pull for, which is crazy thinking about now that I live in the Midwest and in a smaller state and how that all works out. But let's go ahead and talk about the team that you work for currently, the Astros. Last season, of course, Oakland won the West, the American League West, and Houston this season is in a great position to reclaim that title. I know they won several of those prior to 2020. How has this team looked? I know it's been an up and down season for many teams. They started off really well. They struggled. I think in their last 10 games are 5-5. How does the team look currently?
They look really good, and it has been very interesting to watch them throughout the course of the season, because one of the big offseason moves was George Springer signing with the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yeah.
And it's pretty obvious what he brings to the ball club as far as the electricity at the top of the lineup and his ability to, start games off with a home run. He played a great center field. He was really a good chemistry guy in the clubhouse and a fan favorite. So, how do you replace that, and how do you get back to the offense that was in 2019 that put him in the World Series? And there's obvious peripherals around the organization that are still out there, with fans being involved, road trips being extremely tough, with them facing the booing and all of the vitriol that comes their way. So I've been pleasantly surprised, to say the least, at how this team has performed throughout the course of the season, with the controversy surrounding them, with losing a key free agent in George Springer, and wondering what this young pitching staff was going to be able to do. That was probably one of the biggest questions for me was, is Luis Garcia the guy that he was in 2020? Can Framber Valdez bounce back and continue to be the guy he was in 2020? Jose Urquidy, they've got some good young talent. So it's been a nice mix of young with a little bit of the old, and some of those guys that were developed inside the organization that have done a very good job. But for them to be this far in first place, it's a little surprising, even though I work for them and watch them on a daily basis. But I think they've surprised a lot of people with how well and consistent they've been.
For sure. And the West, I think Oakland has kind of fallen off. The Mariners have surprised me, I think, all of baseball, the way they played, only several games out of the wild card. And the way the Yankees are playing, like, there's a chance the Mariners and the Blue Jays may be in the wild card game, which is crazy to think about. You talk about the Blue Jays, they made two really good moves. I think Marcus Semien and Springer have to be the two best one of the two best off-season moves any team could make, just looking at what Marcus has done after leaving Oakland. And again, you talk about Springer and what he does at the top of the order, top of the lineup there, and he can really set the tone for any team. And we saw what he does in the playoffs. He's always played really well. Once the postseason has started, probably one of the best postseason players in recent history that I can think of. But yeah, their starting rotation is really good. They have a lot of young talent. Like I told you earlier, I've always watched Oakland's been my team, although I live in Wisconsin now, so I cheer a lot for the Brewers and I watch all their games. But I've watched a ton of Astros play, and yeah, I mean, it's always frustrating, especially when Oakland plays them, because I feel like Houston really has their number. You mentioned the booing and the fans and all that this season. Do you think last season, the lack of that really is the difference, I guess, that you can see based on last year when they didn't have any fans in the stands until the playoffs, and this season when there are fans? And of course, we all know that the fans are going to be angry, just kind of based on the whole scandal, and we don't really need to go too deep into that. But have you noticed a difference?
Yeah, last season was very interesting in so many different ways, with the start of the season, the stop of the season. Are we going to start the season? And then obviously we get into that 60-game schedule where you're playing in front of no fans. So
right.
you kind of suck the energy out of the stadiums no matter where they're playing. And then you get into the playoffs, you start playing at neutral sites, which made it even more interesting. But I do believe, it was kind of a two-way dynamic working with the Astros last year, because you mentioned some of those young pitchers and players for the Houston Astros. I think they benefited from not having to play in front of fans. So they were able to get the big league competition without the extra stress of having fans out there screaming at them, or the pressures of having their hometown fans cheering for them with the expectation of going out there and performing. And then on the other side, you get the veteran guys, because I think there may be 5 or 6 or 7 guys left on the ball club from that 2017 team that was embroiled in that scandal.
Mm-hmm.
And now, they go out in 2020. They have nothing to worry about. There's nobody yelling at them. Everything seems to be on social media or through, media outlets. and they're able to just play the game. But there was a real energy lacking in that clubhouse and in that dugout. And I was real curious to see how they were going to react to a season with fans, and you start to hear it and you can't avoid it. And for whatever reason, I don't know how these guys have done it, but it's almost as if they've thrived in that environment. They still play very well on the road. They still, are able to go out and put up offensive numbers that, rival what they did in 2017, if not better. So I think that they kind of took it upon themselves to go out there and prove to everybody that they were, to prove to everybody that even though they did what they did, that they are still a very good team. And that might be the motivation. And they've played extremely well and kind of fed off each other and fed off that energy, whether it be positive at home or negative on the road.
Absolutely. And we saw what they did in the postseason last year, after having, I guess, probably to their standards, definitely a down season, and were only able to get into the playoffs just based on the expanded playoffs and all that. But once they got in, I mean, we saw what they did to Oakland, and they moved on, and they looked primed to go to do another World Series run that didn't end up that way. But we saw what they can do in the playoffs. Once the lights get bright, those guys, those stars on that team, they really shine, and they really do well in that situation.
Yeah. No, it's just amazing to me. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's just amazing to think about this team, and hopefully you guys see this in Wisconsin with the Milwaukee Brewers this season. Is that you keep hearing about in the postseason guys being able to flip the switch. I never really believed that until last year when I watched those guys go through the 2020 season playing sub 500 baseball and then being a game away from getting into the World Series. And, some of those guys, put up better numbers in 10 games in the postseason than they did in 60 games during the regular season. So it was kind of crazy to watch all that.
Bregman, he's back on the team after missing some significant time. How has his presence been felt now that he's back? I know he had a big home run. I think was it last night or the night prior. I know he's a big presence in that lineup. How does it feel now that he's back on the team?
It feels good. Aledmys Diaz, the Astros are lucky enough to have a guy like Aledmys Diaz who filled in beautifully, played a great defensive third base, had some great timely hitting. So you really didn't miss too much as far as the on-field stuff. But Alex Bregman is definitely a force inside that lineup, and I think he changes the dynamic and creates a little more depth. And starting pitchers that have to go out there and game plan trying to face that lineup 2 or 3 times with an Alex Bregman in it definitely complicates the situation. And he's a guy who is an absolute, you've heard the term gym rat, where the guy just can't get out of the gym. He's constantly in there working on their jump shot or in the weight room. That, Alex Bregman is the baseball version of a gym rat. He takes batting practice every single day. It could be optional after the plane arrived at 8:00 in the morning and they've got a noon game. He'll be on the field taking batting practice, and I think that's where he provides a little leadership as far as attitude is concerned. He's got a relentless work ethic, and he wears the number 2 on the back of his jersey because he feels as if he was slighted by not being the number 1 overall pick in the year he got drafted. So he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He is a smaller guy on the field, so he kind of takes pride in the fact that he is maybe underestimated, and he loves going out there and proving people wrong. And you saw it, like you're talking about, that walk-off or that game-tying home run he had the other day. He loves being in the spotlight. He really enjoys being the guy in the moment. And I think that's the attitude that he kind of brings to the Astros and gives them a little bit of that added edge they need sometimes, especially down the stretch here in September when things get a little fatigued and a little stressed. He's a guy that can provide a big hit when you need it.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys in the playoffs that really, really enjoys that spotlight. We've seen what he's done over the past several years, and like it really is his moment whenever the playoffs start. They're going to make the playoffs. I mean, that's pretty obvious this season. Are there any concerns heading into the postseason that may keep this team from going to another World Series?
The only concern that I might have, if you went back to right before the trade deadline, I would have said their bullpen instantly. That would have been a no-brainer to be able to say that. But, fortunately, James Click was able to go out there and pick up a guy like Kendall Graveman. Yimi Garcia, I think, is a kind of a secret weapon out in that bullpen. Phil Maton's been pretty good. Rafael Montero was a guy that the Astros actually wanted to get in that Seattle trade also. So if he's able to get back off the injured list, I think it would really create some big time depth and big time experience in the late innings of games for Dusty Baker to be able to go to. The starting rotation has been incredible, and I think that they present a unique problem for James Click and Dusty Baker as they set that rotation going into the postseason, because you have a couple of different options. And I know the Astros, being highly analytical, love to be able to play matchups. So a lot of it's going to depend on who they play in that first round, who they play in that second round, but they're going to have some pieces that they're able to manipulate and move around. But if I'm sitting here right now and having you ask me that question,
mm-hmm.
and this is going to sound crazy, is their offense. You talked about how they're 5-5 in the last 10 games. And that's one of the things that's been amazing to me, is that they can show up, put up 15 runs and get 20 hits. And then the next day, they're struggling to get 2 or 3 runs to try and win a ball game, and they scratch it out. So that's the only thing that kind of jumps out to me that maybe is an issue, because once you get to the playoffs, you're facing the best pitching in baseball. And then you put that lineup out there and that they're having a rough day, that could be a real issue.
Right. No, for sure. And that's kind of an issue that the Brewers also face sometimes, is their offense. Really, like most of that first couple months of their season, like it was really struggling to score several runs. And then, of course, they make that trade to get Willy Adames, and he completely changed the offense of this team, the mindset. He became an instant leader, clubhouse guy. And since then, they've really picked up. I think they have a 10 or 11 game lead in our division. I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest, division lead heading into this final couple of weeks of baseball. I know you're an American League guy, but have you watched any or seen any of the Brewers, especially with the pitching that they have with their 1, 2, 3 at the top of the rotation that probably rivals, I would say, any rotation in baseball?
No, and you know what? I glimpse at the National League. Granted, when you start to play in these interleague type situations, it changes from year to year. And currently, the Astros are playing the National League West, so I've had a chance to check out the Padres, Dodgers, Giants, and teams like that. So, but on the periphery here in September, you're kind of glancing across the divisions, trying to see who's doing what. And I don't know if it's a real surprise that Milwaukee's doing as well as they are because of the pitching that you're talking about. On a daily basis, you're hearing Woodruff, Burns, and Peralta almost on back-to-back nights. And then you're going, okay, they pitched well. Who'd they face? And then it says the Dodgers, and it says they're shutting them out, and it says they're holding them to 3 or 4 hits. And you're going, good God, that's not easy to do. But these guys are very consistent. They go out there and do it. I think Craig Counsell's doing an amazing job of motivating these guys and leading these guys. And when you have pitching like the Brewers do, you really don't need your offense to step up on a nightly basis. You need them to go out there and get the timely hits. And I think that's what Seattle's doing right now, is they're getting some decent pitching and getting the timely hits. But I think that's where the Milwaukee Brewers present a certain challenge, I think, once they get to the playoffs. Because you're right, they are 11 games up. I checked that out. Their run differential is 100 plus 116. So that means when they are going out and winning, they're winning big. And the reason they're winning big is because their pitching is so dominant. And, you talked about Willy Adames. I think he's provided a serious spark on offense. But how about what he's done defensively, too?
Yes.
You start to solidify that defense. And guess what it does to your pitching staff? It makes them that much better, because if they don't have the swing and miss stuff that night, and they have to pitch a little more to contact or adjust, they've got guys making plays behind them. So I love that aspect of it. I think they're a fun team to watch, because everybody underestimates Milwaukee for whatever reason it is, and they go out and shock the world. And I think that's a lot of fun to watch. And I think it makes them very, very scary in the postseason, because when you start to play these shortened seasons and you can condense your starting rotation and maybe move a couple of guys in the back end of your rotation into that bullpen to create a little more depth or create some matchup issues for teams across the way, I think that they are a dangerous team. And I had a coworker yesterday. One of the camera guys came in our booth and, was kind of, surveying the area, going, hey, who do you think is going to be in the World Series? And I had no problem saying, the Milwaukee Brewers could shock the world, get into the World Series and play against the Chicago White Sox this season. I know that if there's any Astro fans listening to this podcast, when they eventually get to it, are gonna hate on me for that. But I just think the White Sox are a little too powerful, and the pitching and the timely hitting and the good defense for Milwaukee is what I think is going to surprise a lot of people in the postseason.
Yeah, you mentioned their defense this past offseason. They really made an emphasis on shoring up that defense. They signed Jackie Bradley Jr., who's an amazing defensive
Yeah,
center fielder. He can play
good
different
call.
outfield positions. Colton Wong, they signed him from their division rival, and he's probably defensively one of the better second basemen. And offensively, he's really picked it up this season. Like he's never been a real offensive force, but this season he's having a real good year. And the Brewers are made up, I want to say they're made up of a bunch of parts. They don't really have one go-to guy. Christian Yelich was that guy in 19 when they, or 18 when they made it almost to the World Series. This season, he's
Mhm.
having a down year, but they have a lot of really good pieces. They have a lot of depth, and this season they've been hit by a ton of injuries.
I
Specifically,
know.
Christian Yelich, he's missed a ton of time, and they've been able to bounce back with guys that maybe people haven't heard of. But like you said, Craig Counsell is really, he's able to get the best out of his players, and he's probably one of the most underrated managers, I would say, in baseball. Just seeing what he's been able to do year in and year out. This is going to be their fourth year making it to the postseason. Not very many teams can say they've been to the past four postseasons. And so, yeah, I completely agree. And I like what you said about the White Sox. I think they're a team that if I think it's going to be the Astros, just because like I don't know, and I'm not just saying that because you're on, but I've picked the Astros, and I say the Astros and Brewers are going to face each other, or the Astros and the Dodgers,
That'd
and
be fun.
that would make for great TV. Although I wish it would be the Brewers, because I think our pitching versus some of those Astros hitters would be just
Oh
amazing
yeah.
TV as well. But talk to real quick about the White Sox. I know you played for them at one point, won a World Series with them. What about this White Sox team is really shocking to you, or maybe going to be the reason why they could go to the World Series?
Well, part of the reason I have been watching them, obviously, I have ties to them going back to 2005. But at the same time, when the
Right.
Astros were I'm broadcasting with the Astros since 2013. So I had the opportunity to call games when they were losing 100 games, and now I get an opportunity to call games when they're winning 100 games. So I've seen kind of
Mm-hmm.
the quote unquote process that we hear around sports, the building of a team, the building of a franchise. And the Astros did it in a particular way where they did it through the draft. They were very fortunate and benefited from great draft picks and developing them. They did a good job picking guys up off the waiver wires. They did a great job in trades, free agency. And, I did a lot of interviews in Chicago during those lean years where the White Sox were trying to build back a franchise that could compete in the postseason, if not go to the World Series. And they were drawing a lot of comparisons between the Houston Astros and Chicago White Sox, because you do have some internal talent that they've drafted, developed, and done a very good job with to get there. And then you add a couple of key free agents. You go out on the international market and you pick up Eloy Jimenez, Luis Roberts, and some of these other guys, and put them in that situation. And then you add some key free agents. I know Dallas Keuchel's not having the year that they had hoped for, but he's still a veteran presence who goes out there and competes on a daily basis. Who is it? Yasmani Grandal behind the
Yeah.
plate has done a very good job working with the pitching staffs. They reinvented Giolito, from the Washington Nationals. I think he's on the injured list, but they kind of reinvented these guys and developed these guys. Free agent signing in Lance Lynn, who's been an absolute beast throughout the season and just
Mm-hmm.
eats up innings and mows down hitters. Carlos Rodon, I mean, that might be the greatest sign of the season.
Yeah.
A guy that was battling for a fifth spot in the rotation, and when he's healthy, he's one of the more dominant left-handers in the game. So I love the way that they go out and hit the baseball. I love the way that they go out and pitch the baseball. Back into their bullpen might be the best back into the bullpen that anybody's ever seen. And
Mm-hmm.
if you put them in a postseason with Kimbrel and Hendrick, your starters, and you start to push Kopech and gosh, that nasty lefty they've got out of that bullpen that just brings all kinds of, hell and funk with the stuff that he has, you really start to shorten games and give them the opportunity. And then you kind of add the swag and the flash that the White Sox bring. It makes it that much more entertaining for me. I'm a big Tim Anderson fan.
Oh, same here. I love it. I love the bat flips that he does, the energy, the swag, like that sexiness that he brings to the
Yeah.
baseball game. I love that. And you talk about their bullpen. I guess it might have been the Royals in 14 and 15 who really like perfected that formula in the playoffs, where you go 5 or 6 innings and then they get to their bullpen. The Brewers are the same way. At the back end of our bullpen, we have maybe one of the better closers, if not the best closer in the National League, at least. And Hader, and then we have a really good setup man, and we have a really good bullpen to back that up. So in the postseason, we really
Yep.
don't need our starters to go deep into the postseason. And plus, like you said, some of our starters can go to the bullpen. I know the Astros did that when they won the World Series. I'm trying to think who was their fourth or fifth starter.
Well, it was kind of funny. If you look at 2017 game, I believe it was game 7 of the ALCS, Lance McCullers Jr. comes in and closes that game, throwing 24 curveballs in a row to put away the Yankees. And then then you fast forward to the World Series in game 7, and guess who comes in and closes out that game? Charlie Morton. Both those guys were in the rotation for the Houston Astros. So it's really crazy how some of that stuff works out.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. And like you said, the White Sox are a great team. It may be a Midwest World Series, and that would be fun to see Chicago versus Milwaukee. But before we go, I put out on Twitter that I was going to have you on, and I asked a couple of people if they had any questions, and a couple responded. Nice. So I want to shoot a couple your way real quick. Nothing too complicated. I have a friend who follows me on Twitter. He's from Australia, and he wanted to know, how was it when you were playing in the Australian League in the 90s for the Hunter Eagles?
Dude, I had no idea there was an Australian Winter Baseball League until I
had
signed
no idea either.
It just so happened that I went the year after I got drafted. So I went from my college season to getting drafted, playing in short season A ball, went to an instructional league. And they used the phrase, "We want you to stay fresh because we're sending you to Australia." So I played collegiate league, a short season league, and then I went to instructional league, and then I went to Australia. So for a college guy, that was rather exhausting for me. But at the same time, it was incredibly exciting because I'd never been to Australia, heard nothing but great things about Australia. And we go out there, and it was nothing short of absolutely incredible. Hunter at the time was an expansion team. We were about 2 hours north of Sydney. So we were in a great location right on the coast. And we come to find out that, there's only 4 international guys on each team. And so it was myself, Neil Weber, Everett Stoll, and Bobby Henley, all from the Montreal Expos organization. And our job is to play baseball. We come to find out that the other 20 guys on our team are working 9-to-5 jobs Monday through Friday. Nice. So we practiced, the 4 of us, by ourselves during the week. And on the weekends, we would play a doubleheader Saturday, doubleheader Sunday. So we were playing 4 games in 2 days, which was absolutely insane. But a blast at the same time, because the guys on the team probably played as hard as anybody I've ever played with in my life. They had a huge passion for the game. We're playing on converted rugby fields. Me and Neil Weber were California guys, so we surfed some of the spots out there on the coast, between, Monday and Friday. But I had an absolute blast. I was actually lucky enough to I won a Gold Glove, or the Gold Glove. I'm not sure if it was what was going on there, but I had a blast, won a Gold Glove, and would go back in a heartbeat. I love that place.
Was there any unique meals that you had while you were there? I've never been there as well, so I'm kind of unfamiliar with how that all works out.
Yeah. So when you go to a foreign country, you're always worried about what you're going to be able to eat. Mm-hmm. So, we had a couple of the local guys and their families took us in, and we'd go, around. And finally we were like, okay, I'm just starving. I want to go get a burger. I want to, and they're like, okay, you got to go to this place. Australia was the first place that I had ever had a fried egg on my hamburger. And, a couple years later, we, back in the States, all of a sudden it's a thing now. It's like, oh, put the fried egg on your burger. It's super great. I'm like, dude, I was having this like 5 years ago in Australia. But they also, the other thing that was kind of weird to me is they put a slab of cranberry on there. So it kind of sweetened it up a little bit. But I mean, it wasn't anything too wild. I wasn't out there eating, kangaroos or koalas or anything like that.
I was kind of hoping you'd say that, to be honest, but that's all right. That's awesome. No, I mean, I that's one of the places I would love to go to. I haven't yet. I've been Central America, Mexico, but I have not been out there to Australia. Someday. Last question. This is from my friend Emma. She has a podcast that covers baseball and sports in general. She wants to know what you think of the future of this Astros core. Greinke, Correa, Brantley, Verlander. And this offseason, is there a player or position that you think the front office should prioritize?
That's a really, really good question, and we have been trying to avoid this on our broadcast, by talking about them winning so much because, to start the season, the Astros made a subpar offer to Carlos Correa, and he hasn't had any negotiations since. I think that's probably the biggest question: is Carlos Correa going to come back and be an Astro? I'm in the camp that is holding out hope that there is a chance that he does come back because he fits so well and he's great inside this clubhouse. He's great in the community. His wife Daniela has done a good job in the community here, so they're really have grown some serious roots here in Houston. But will they be able to come up with the number of years or the price tag to keep a guy like Carlos Correa is probably the first biggest question. I think that with the emergence of guys like Luis Garcia, Jose Urquidy, and some of these, in Lance McCullers signing a 5-year deal, I think that he's kind of become the ace of that staff. So as far as Zach Greinke's concerned, he might be pitching himself into free agency. I'm not sure that his price tag is something that is going to keep him around as much as I personally and selfishly enjoy a guy like Zach Greinke, watching him pitch and let alone talking to him, if you can get some words out of him, during batting practice.
Yeah.
But I don't think that maybe that price tag is going to keep him here. The verdict is still out on Justin Verlander. I actually would entertain the idea of bringing him back on a 1-year deal with with heavy incentives to see if he can bounce back from just kind of backload that thing and say, if you get to X amount of starts or X amount of innings, we start to pay you a little bit more and get back to a number that he feels he deserves because of that Tommy John surgery. He's just a freak athlete, and I think that he might actually bounce back in pretty good shape. Michael Brantley, fortunately, is going to be here for another year, but the Astros are set up to have some good young talent, and I think that's where James Click, we might see a little bit more of the personality of James Click once you get into the situations where you're trying to keep key free agents or whether or not you're trying to decide to go young and maybe let go of some of those contracts and some of those veterans. But it's going to be a big offseason. I think that's why there's a little more emphasis here in Houston by this team to maybe push a little bit harder to see what they can do if this is the final year that this core is together.
For sure. No, I completely agree that this core, similar to the Cubs, they had a really several poor years, and then they really hit on a ton of free agents and players and drafts, and they really turned that franchise around into one of the better teams in baseball for the last 4 or 5 years, and it doesn't look like they're going away anytime soon with the talent that they have, the pitching. I'm going to go ahead and end it on that. I know your time is precious, and I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. And I really do appreciate that. Could you go ahead and give your podcast a plug? Because you guys do a good job, you and your co-host.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, myself and a good friend of mine, David Tuttle, played for Team USA back in the day, played 9 years in the minor leagues, never really got the chance to be in the big leagues. But, he kind of brings the pitching side. I bring the defense and hitting side of it. But we have a good time talking about baseball, life, fitness, families. He's a father of multiples just like I am. So we have some interesting stories every now and then. And we're trying to accrue some access to people around the league that really have a passion for the game, much like you do, and bring, some of that to the forefront. But we have a lot of fun. The podcast is called Bleacher Blums. We're on every, platform there is out there for podcasts. We have a YouTube channel. We've got a website. So bleacherblums.com if you want to find out any more information. I really appreciate you allowing me the plug, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your podcast. It's great meeting you.
Absolutely. You as well.